I knew something was wrong the moment my son whispered, "Don't tell the neighbors you're my mother." He said it quickly, barely moving his lips, like he was afraid someone might hear, as if I were a secret, a blemish on the image he had carefully constructed. I didn't ask him why. I didn't ask anything at all. I just smiled politely at the man in a polo shirt who was polishing his boat lift and waved like I was supposed to, like a visitor, like a stranger. It had been a long flight from Washington to Texas, 2 planes and 1 overly air-conditioned taxi ride. I'd brought a small suitcase and a carrier with my homemade apple pie, the kind Thomas used to devour when he was a boy. I was stiff from the trip, my knees aching with every step up the stone walkway. But I didn't complain. I never have. Not when I worked summers to make ends meet. Not when I paid for his college. Not when I signed the papers for the luxury lakeside house he now led me into like I was some casual acquaintance. "Take your shoes off here," he said. "Jessica just had the floors polished." I bent slowly, unzipping my walking shoes. The entryway gleamed. Imported marble, a sterile abstract painting I didn't recognize, and no place to put my coat. I held it in my hands. Jessica came in from the kitchen with a wine glass in one hand and her phone in the other. "Eleanor, welcome," she said, giving me a smile that barely touched her eyes. "We weren't sure which flight you were on." "I texted yesterday," I said. "Right," she nodded, already turning back into the kitchen. "Well, we've got a full house this weekend. A charity evening tonight. I hope that's okay." Thomas took my coat wordlessly and hung it in a narrow closet next to the door. Not the hall closet. That one was full of designer jackets and polished shoes. The kind you buy to match the kind of life you want people to think you have. I walked into the living room. It was beautiful. I'll give them that. Neutral colors, sharp corners, everything curated like a magazine spread. Not a single picture of Thomas as a boy. Not one photograph with me in it. On the fireplace mantel were 4 frames. Jessica's parents in Aspen, Jessica's sister in Paris, Jessica's children from her first marriage. Not even the new baby had a photo with Thomas. Only posed shots. Nothing warm. "Where should I put this?" I held up the pie carrier. "Oh, just leave it on the counter," Jessica said, distracted. "We have catering coming, but the kids might want some." The kids, 12 and 14 from Jessica's previous marriage, Thomas's stepchildren. They peeked in, muttered hellos, and ran upstairs. They didn't know me, had never spoken to me on the phone, and my own granddaughter, the baby, was asleep in some sleek white bassinet that looked more like a gadget than a crib. "We'll show you to the guest room," Thomas said. "Not your room, not your home, just a place to sleep." He led me down the hallway past a door with private office stenciled on it in tiny letters, like I was in some kind of professional space. The guest room was clean, sparse, and cold. It had no books, no chair, just a bed and a small suitcase stand like a hotel. On the nightstand sat a small card. "Welcome guests. Wi-Fi password. Ashworth Lake 1. Ashworth, Jessica's family name. My last name was Cross." "I'll unpack later," I said, sitting slowly on the edge of the bed. My legs needed a break. Thomas hovered for a moment, then said, "Just try to be relaxed tonight. It's mostly Jessica's circle. You know, her father's colleagues, local philanthropists, that crowd." "Of course," I said. "What I meant was I understand I'm not supposed to speak too much, not supposed to say who I am. I'm just window dressing." He left the room, closing the door gently behind him. I stayed, sitting there, looking at the blank white walls. Then I opened my purse and checked for the envelope. It was still there. the original trust agreement. Because Thomas couldn't get a mortgage on his own, he'd needed me. My name was listed as the primary owner in a trust. Legally, this house was mine. I'd paid the down payment in full, $210,000 from my savings, the money I'd built up over decades of teaching. "It's just a formality," he had said. "Just help me start, Mom. It's our family's future." I believed him. I always believed him. I pressed the envelope flat in my lap, ran my hand over the top. Then I opened the flap and pulled out the document slowly, like it might burn me, and I took a photo. Then I slid the deed back in and zipped the purse closed. Tomorrow I would go for a walk just to clear my head. I would say I would take my time, and I would find someone who could help me remember how ownership really works. The next morning, the house was already alive with activity before I made it to the kitchen. Jessica was directing a catering team setting up for the evening, while Thomas stood by the refrigerator scrolling through his phone. Neither of them looked up when I entered. "Morning," I said. Not too loud, not too soft. "Morning," Thomas replied automatically, eyes still on the screen. I walked to the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee from the machine. It was one of those sleek, modern types that looked like it required a license to operate. The coffee was thin and bitter, but I didn't complain. I sat quietly at the breakfast bar and watched. "We're heading out soon," Jessica said without turning. "Golf club, and then lunch with the kids." "That sounds nice," I replied. "Maybe I'll take a walk around the neighborhood, stretch my legs." Thomas finally looked up. "You're sure you're okay with that? It's a pretty exclusive area. Just don't talk to anyone too long, okay?" I tilted my head slightly. "Why would I?" "No reason," he said quickly. "Just, people here can be particular." I nodded, pretending not to notice the way Jessica glanced at him sharply, like maybe he'd said too much. After they left, I stood alone in the silent kitchen. The counters gleamed. The fridge hummed. The baby monitor blinked softly on the table. I picked up my coffee and walked through the rooms. I'd never been here before, never invited. When Thomas bought the house a year ago, I was recovering from a fall and couldn't travel. And after that, he always had reasons. Too busy, too much going on. Jessica wasn't feeling well. The house wasn't ready. Now that I was finally here, I saw what ready meant. It meant perfect, pristine, controlled. It meant there was no room for me. In the hallway, I stopped in front of a series of black and white photos, architectural shots, dramatic angles of bridges, skyline views, but no family photos, not even of the baby. I opened the door to the laundry room. Inside, stacked appliances buzzed quietly, and all ducks. Next to them stood a tall linen cabinet. I tried the handle, unlocked. Inside were files, envelopes, household paperwork. I spotted a familiar blue accordion file, one I recognized from the day he had begged me to help with the trust. I pulled it out. There, right on top, was the closing summary, the legal trust agreement, my name printed in full, Eleanor Cross, as primary owner. Below that, his name in smaller font, the secondary party. I slid the file back into place. I wasn't looking for confirmation. I already had it, but something in me wanted to see it again, to remind myself that I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't being petty or dramatic. I had every right to be in this house more than Jessica, more than anyone. Later that afternoon, the house was a storm of quiet, efficient activity. Caterers moved through the kitchen with trays of canapés. Jessica directed them with the precision of a surgeon, which was fitting, given her upbringing as the daughter of one. The floral arrangements go on the console table, not the mantel, she instructed one of them without looking up. "Do you need help with anything?" I asked, standing in the doorway. She paused, as if the question confused her. Oh no, Eleanor. It's all under control. The guests for the charity evening began to arrive as the sun set over the lake. Men in expensive suits and women in silk dresses. They brought bottles of wine and complimented the marble countertops and the view. I stood near the fireplace, trying to look unobtrusive. A woman with a diamond necklace approached me. "And how do you know the Ashworths?" she asked with a bright, curious smile. Before I could answer, Jessica glided over, placing a hand on my arm. "This is Eleanor," she said with a quick, dismissive smile. She was Thomas's former nanny, a dear part of his childhood. His former nanny. I felt it like a needle under the ribs. Quick, sharp, casual, but I didn't flinch. I smiled and let the word hang in the air, let it settle into their impression of me like wallpaper glue. "How wonderful," the woman said, her interest instantly fading. "So nice of them to have you. I've always looked after his best interests," I replied calmly, financial and otherwise. Her brows lifted slightly. Jessica's smile tightened. Thomas, who had been standing nearby, suddenly found something fascinating about the ice in his drink. The woman laughed politely, clearly unsure if I was joking, and drifted away. Later that night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the photo of the trust agreement open on my phone. I stared at my name, not because I didn't remember it, but because I wanted to hold on to it like armor. I remembered when Thomas called, desperate and eager. "This is the one, Mom. This house. It's perfect. We just need help with the down payment, and the bank wants someone with better equity. It's only on paper, just until I refinance." I said yes without hesitation. I always did. I cashed out the annuity I'd been building since my late husband passed. Took a hit on the taxes. I told myself it was worth it. I was building something for the next generation. But now, sitting in this pristine guest room, listening to the faint murmur of a party that had erased me, I realized I hadn't built anything. I had just rented love, on a very short lease. The next morning, the house was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. They had left early for some brunch appointment. The door clicked shut, and silence fell over the house like a heavy curtain. I stood in the kitchen for a while, holding my coffee. Then I opened the refrigerator. It was full of green juices, containers labeled with calorie counts, pre-cut vegetables, and protein bars. Nothing that resembled food to me, nothing warm, nothing familiar. I closed the fridge and walked back into the living room. That's when I noticed it. A small gallery wall near the staircase. 6 framed photos in a perfect grid. Jessica's family, of course. Her parents on a yacht. Her children at a ski resort. Even the baby in a sepia-toned professional shoot. No photo of Thomas. No photo of me. Nothing to suggest he'd ever had a life before this one. I wandered upstairs slowly. My knees creaked, but I took my time. At the top, a long hallway stretched out, doors closed neatly on both sides. I knew which room was the baby's from the soft hum of a white noise machine. Another door was open slightly. Thomas's office. I paused. The door creaked as I pushed it wider. A clean desk, 2 monitors, a framed degree, and on the shelf, trophies for a top financial consultant. Not a single personal photograph. But in the corner, tucked into the bookshelf, was something familiar. His father's old watch on a stand. I walked over and picked it up. I turned it over in my hands. On the back was the engraving I'd chosen for his college graduation. "Remember who you are, Mom." He had kept it. Tears stung, sudden and sharp. I closed my hand around the cool metal and placed it back. I walked downstairs and out into the backyard. The grass was clipped too short, the patio furniture too white. A large playset sat untouched in a far corner, still with the manufacturer's tags on it. They were building a life that didn't include the mess of children, the softness of memory, the reality of family. Just then, the sliding door opened behind me. Thomas stepped out. "Oh, you're out here. Beautiful yard," I said. He looked around like he hadn't noticed it before. "Yeah, I guess it's nice." We stood in silence for a moment. Then I said it. I saw the pictures inside. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Jessica has a certain aesthetic, I noticed. It's efficient." "Mom," he hesitated. "It's not that we don't appreciate everything you've done. You've been generous, always. But this house, we've worked hard for this. It's part of a certain life. You understand, right?" I turned slowly to look at him. "You mean the kind of life where people don't have mothers who wear old cardigans and bake apple pies?" "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "It's not." He looked away, out over the empty playset. "Jessica's parents are coming next week. We're throwing a small brunch. It's more her family's style." I waited. "I just think maybe it's best if you don't mention the trust." I hadn't planned to. He turned back to me. "Really? Of course, I wouldn't want to ruin the illusion." There was a pause, a long, empty one. Then he said it, the sentence that landed like a stone at the bottom of a dry well. "You know how people judge. You wouldn't want anyone thinking I didn't earn this house." And that was it. The truth says. I looked at my son, grown, polished, polite, and entirely unaware of the weight of his words. "I never wanted credit, Thomas," I said quietly. "I wanted connection." He shifted uncomfortably. "It's just complicated." "No," I said. "It's very simple." I went back inside, leaving him there, on the patio, standing in the perfect yard he didn't want to share with the imperfect woman who raised him. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. I lay on the guest bed, hands folded over my stomach, and stared at the ceiling. I could hear the distant hum of the climate control, the occasional creak of the house settling, and the rustle of wind against expensive floor-to-ceiling glass. I thought of my own mother, who never had money to give me but gave me everything else. Her voice, her strength, her stubborn insistence that people deserve to be seen, not hidden. And in that quiet house, I decided I wouldn't be hidden anymore. The next day, they dressed me up like I was a problem to be solved. Jessica came into the guest room just after 5, holding a pale gray silk shawl and a small, tasteful brooch. "I thought you might want to wear something softer," she said, like it was a suggestion, but it wasn't. I looked at the soft shawl, the kind that disappeared into the background. "I brought my navy dress," I said. Jessica smiled tightly. "It's just that tonight's crowd is particular. You'll feel more comfortable in this." I took it without argument. Let her think she was winning something. Downstairs, the dining room table had been extended. Glasses sparkled. Napkins were folded into intricate fans. Music played softly from invisible speakers. The whole house smelled of expensive floral arrangements. Not a single dish was homemade. It was all catered, labeled, precise. Thomas emerged from his office in a crisp shirt and kissed Jessica on the cheek. "Everything looks perfect," he murmured. She beamed. Then she turned to me. "So, just one little thing. When people ask, just say you were Thomas's former nanny. Not that we're ashamed, of course," she added quickly. "It's just simpler that way." "Simpler," Thomas chimed in. "Jessica's family has a certain dynamic with appearances. This community is full of very curated social circles. People make assumptions. And what would they assume exactly?" I asked. "That your mother flew across the country to see her son's new house?" He gave a short, nervous laugh. Don't be like that, Mom. I wasn't being like anything. I was just seeing it all clearly now. The doorbell rang. Jessica jumped slightly, then smoothed her dress. Okay, showtime. One by one, the guests trickled in. Men in bespoke jackets, women in understated designer dresses, all of them with the same glossy smile. They brought vintage wines and compliments about the architecture. And how do you know our wonderful hosts? One of the women asked, gesturing toward me with her champagne flute. Jessica stepped in quickly. This is Eleanor. She was Thomas's nanny back when he was a little boy, a dear friend of the family. Oh, how sweet, the woman said, her eyes glazing over with polite disinterest. So lovely that you've stayed in touch. I nodded, smiled, took a sip of champagne I didn't like, and listened to them talk about charity boards, art auctions, and their children's Ivy League prospects. Thomas moved among the guests like a trained host, laughing just enough, listening just enough, speaking about market trends only when invited. Jessica watched him like a coach from the sidelines. The whole thing felt like a stage play, and I was just a prop. At one point, I excused myself to the kitchen for a glass of water. Thomas followed me in. You're doing great, he said quietly. Thanks for playing along. Is that what I'm doing? I asked. Playing? He ran a hand through his hair. Look, I know it's weird, but you know how important this is to Jessica. She grew up with a surgeon for a father. Reputation means something in her world. And what about your world, Thomas? He hesitated. This is my world now. I nodded slowly. Understood. When I returned to the living room, they were talking about real estate, how much their lakeside properties had appreciated. Someone mentioned the market rate of the homes on their street. Oh, but this house, Jessica said brightly. We got it at just the right moment. Thomas is such a savvy financial consultant. He knew exactly when to make the move. One of the guests agreed. I sat down quietly and listened. Thomas said nothing about who made the purchase possible, who provided the capital for the down payment, who was the primary owner on the trust. It didn't fit the narrative. I wasn't part of the story they were telling about themselves. Later, when dessert was served tiny, deconstructed cheesecakes, I caught Thomas's eye across the room. For a second, he looked like a boy again, nervous, uncertain, waiting to see if I'd embarrass him. I held his gaze and smiled. Not kindly, not unkindly, just enough. Enough to remind him I wasn't forgotten. I was quiet, but not erased. When the guests finally left, one of the men patted Thomas on the shoulder. Lovely evening, and your former nanny is such a charming woman, so dignified. Thanks, Thomas said. She is. I went upstairs before he could say more, slipped out of the silk shawl, unpinned the brooch. Back in my nightgown, I opened my phone again, looked at the photo of the trust agreement, my name, his name, the value. I stared at it for a long time, then clicked on share and sent it to my lawyer's private email. Not with a message, not yet, just insurance, just in case this little play of theirs ever needed a rewrite. The house was dark but not quiet. Somewhere in the walls, the plumbing sighed. The refrigerator clicked in its sleep. I lay on the guest bed with my hands folded over the blanket, staring at the ceiling where a shadow from the security light passed back and forth like a slow pendulum. I couldn't sleep, not because I wasn't tired. I was. My feet ached from standing too long in shoes meant for show, not comfort. My jaw ached from all the smiling. No, it wasn't pain that kept me awake. It was the quiet realization that something inside me had shifted. I remembered a time, though it feels like another life, when Thomas was small. He used to run to the door when I came home from school, arms outstretched. There were no caterers or designer furniture back then, only the two of us in a small apartment. and he was proud of me then. He used to tell people, "That's my mom. She's a teacher. She helps kids learn." Now I was his former nanny, a secret, a liability. I turned to my side, trying not to make the bed creak. Outside the window, the perfectly manicured trees swayed slightly under the moonlight. Ow. Somewhere down the block, a motion-triggered floodlight came on. In that pale glow, I saw something I hadn't noticed earlier, a small, tasteful plaque by the edge of the manicured lawn. I sat up, peering through the slats of the blinds. The Ashworths, it read, engraved in brushed metal, anchored into the ground with pride, Jessica's family name. Not even a hyphenated acknowledgement of my son. Thomas Cross had been shortened, polished, and sanded down until he fit better into this new, glossy life. It was almost funny. Almost. I reached for the drawer of the nightstand. Inside was a hotel-style notepad and pen. I pulled it out and wrote in small, steady letters, "It's not bitterness, it's math." Then I drew a line down the middle of the page. On one side, money sent, years worked, hours given, meals made, papers signed. On the other, phone calls received, invitations offered, thanks spoken. The left side was full. The right side had nothing but air. I folded the page, tucked it into my wallet behind my driver's license, and turned off the lamp. But I still couldn't sleep. I thought about the conversation we hadn't had, the one where Thomas might have looked me in the eye and said, "I'm sorry. I forgot where I came from. I forgot who stood with me." But that conversation wouldn't happen. Not because he was cruel. No, he wasn't. Thomas had simply grown comfortable with the benefits of my resources and the invisibility of my identity. Comfortable accepting my sacrifices without ever questioning what they cost me. Comfortable not having to thank me, not having to remember, and I'd allowed it. For years, I let myself believe that love, even lopsided love, was enough. But I was tired now. Not just in my bones, but deeper, in the parts of me that had carried hope for too long without rest. I'd given him this house. I'd watched him host his new life in it. I'd heard the careful omissions, the revised introductions, the tidy edits to his history. I'd smiled through all of it. But now I was awake, fully awake, and I couldn't unsee it. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, stood slowly, and walked to the closet where my suitcase Saturday. I opened the small front pocket. The envelope was still there. I took it out again, unfolded the trust agreement, and stared at the date, October 17th, the day we established the trust, the day I wired the money, the day I bought him the future he didn't want to share with me. And then I reread the key line my lawyer had insisted on. The primary owner, Eleanor Cross, retains sole authority over any sale, transfer, or refinancing of the property. He couldn't even sell this house without my signature. And suddenly, I felt calm. Not vindictive, not angry, just clear. There would be no shouting, no letters, no drama, just the slow, steady turning of the wheel back into my hands. It was still my house, and he had forgotten what that meant. By morning, I had made a decision. Not loud, not theatrical, just quiet and final, like a door closing with a soft click. The house was empty again. Thomas and Jessica had taken the baby to some infant development class. The older kids were at school. I stood in the kitchen, still in my robe, drinking coffee that tasted like cardboard and planning my steps. First, confirm the document, the original, not just the copy in my purse. I knew where it was. I had seen the blue accordion file in the linen cabinet, tucked between home warranties and appliance manuals. At the time, I hadn't wanted to touch it. Now, I wanted nothing more. I walked across the house slowly, not sneaking, just moving like I belonged, which, legally, I did. The laundry room was quiet. I opened the cabinet, reached for the file. Inside, nothing had changed. The original trust agreement, signed and notarized, my name first, as primary owner, his second, my signature, dated in ink, from a pen my husband gave me. The kind of pen you don't throw away. I placed the file on the counter and opened my phone. No hesitation, no rehearsal, just one photo, clear, centered, complete. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I emailed it to the same address I'd used the night before, my lawyer's private inbox. I didn't add a message, didn't need one. I closed the file and placed it exactly where I found it. Not because I was hiding anything, but because some steps should be quiet, not sneaky, just deliberate. Next, make space. I walked back to the guest room, packed a small tote bag with my essentials, wallet, keys, phone charger, my reading glasses, and a single change of clothes. I left the rest in the closet, hanging undisturbed. The suitcase stayed by the wall. The bed remained made. I didn't plan to run. I planned to move with intention, with structure. I made myself a sandwich with some cold chicken from the fridge, ate standing up, looking out the window at the street full of lakeside homes and identical mailboxes. At noon, the door opened. Jessica's voice carried in. "Let's put her down for a nap before she explodes." They were back. I walked to the front hallway and met them just as Thomas was putting the baby's car seat down. "Would you mind if I had a little time here on my own?" I asked. "Just for a day or two. You've been so generous. I thought I'd stay and enjoy the quiet after you go to that spa resort you mentioned." Jessica looked at Thomas. He blinked. "You mean while we're away?" "It's just the weekend, Mom." "Exactly," I said. "I'll clean up after myself. Won't be any trouble." Jessica gave a quick, rehearsed smile. "Of course, that would be lovely. It's just, we hadn't planned to leave the baby with you." "Oh, heavens, no," I said lightly. "You'll all go. I'll have the house to myself. A little retreat. I could use the rest." Thomas nodded slowly. "Well, sure. I mean, yeah, that works." I could feel him calculating. The security system. The possibility of my doing something that might require explanation to Jessica's parents later, but he smiled anyway. "You deserve a break," he said, "after all you've done for us." Funny, that was the first time he'd said anything close to that since I arrived. They left the next morning in a rush of bags and sunscreen and instructions about the pool filter and thermostat settings. Jessica kissed the baby 3 times before Thomas finally said, "Come on, we're going to miss our check-in window." I stood in the doorway, waving, holding the key fob like any trusted guest. Then I closed the door behind them, locked it, and leaned my back against the smooth, cool paint. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the sound of truth returning to the walls. I walked into the living room, sat in the pristine armchair I hadn't dared to touch all week, kicked off my shoes and stretched my legs. This was not revenge. This was not an outburst. This was restoration. In the afternoon, I used a secure document service online and arranged for a digital copy of the trust agreement to be sent to my lawyer. I didn't call Thomas. I didn't warn him. And I didn't feel cruel. I felt clean. At sunset, I made myself tea, real tea, with loose leaves. I found a simple ceramic mug pushed to the back of a cupboard, one without any brand markings or patterns. It was perfect. I sat on the back patio as the sky turned gold over the lake and listened to the hum of the pool filter. Tomorrow, I would call my lawyer. Tonight, I would enjoy the home I had paid for, the one where, for once, I wasn't a guest. The sun rose without asking permission. I was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and a pen I'd found in Jessica's desk. Monogrammed, of course. Outside, a landscaping crew was meticulously trimming the hedges. I made real coffee, not from the capsules they used, but slow-dripped, dark and rich, the way I'd always made it. At 9:01 a.m., I dialed the number. 3 rings, then the familiar voice of Helen Stafford, my attorney. "Helen," I said calmly. "It's Eleanor Cross." She hesitated a beat. "Well, my goodness, it's been a few years. Still in Washington?" "Actually," I said, "I'm in Texas visiting family, temporarily. And how can I help?" I glanced at the single photo on the fridge, of Thomas cropped tightly between Jessica and one of his stepchildren. He wasn't smiling. "I'd like to enforce the terms of a property trust," I said. "Go on." I laid it out simply, that I had funded the house, that as the primary owner in the trust I held controlling equity, and that I retained sole authority over the property. "The trust was never amended?" she asked. "No." "And you have a copy of the original agreement?" "I sent it to your inbox last night," I replied. Subject line, reference. She paused. "Well, that simplifies things." She gave a little exhale, the kind lawyers do when they're trying not to sound impressed. "What do you want, Eleanor?" "Just tell me plainly." "I want the property title transferred solely into my name. I want full authority, unambiguous, final. I'm putting the house up for sale, and the money will go into a new trust for my granddaughter. Do you anticipate resistance?" I sipped my coffee. "He doesn't know yet, but yes." Helen didn't ask why. She didn't need to. She'd met Thomas once, years ago, during a matter involving a high-risk investment scheme he'd tried to launch. She had sized him up in 10 minutes. "All right," she said. "You're the primary owner with full authority. We have leverage. I'll prepare a transfer of title declaration. Once you sign, we can file it. If he challenges, it's a civil matter, but based on this document, we'll win. You want it quiet? As quiet as dignity allows." "Understood. I'll email a draft this afternoon." We hung up. I sat in silence for a long while, staring at the open space of the living room, the expensive furniture, the curated color palette, the faint scent of lemon cleaner. None of it mattered, not anymore. At noon, I opened Thomas's desk drawer. I wasn't snooping. I was securing what I'd earned. Inside, beneath a stack of financial journals, I found the spare set of keys. Garage, office, the fireproof box under the stairs. I used the garage key first, walked through, examining the details. Boxes labeled Christmas, baby gear, old electronics. One bin said, "Mom, old stuff." It was dusty. I opened it. Inside were a few framed photos of Thomas and me, one from his college graduation, another from a small camping trip we'd taken when he was 9, a recipe card in my handwriting for apple pie, a birthday card I'd sent 2 years ago, unopened. I closed the lid and left it on the workbench. Then I went to the fireproof box. Documents, insurance, medical files, a folder labeled Estate Plan J. Ashworth, her trust, her legacy plan. Not a mention of me. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself another coffee. I looked out at the backyard and thought about how many versions of myself had lived in Thomas's mind. There was the version who taught and worked and bent herself into shapes that fit his needs, the version who signed checks, the version who stayed quiet. Now he would meet the one who remembered what she owned. That evening, Helen's draft arrived. Clean, precise, no unnecessary language. a quiet assertion of what was already mine. I signed digitally and sent it back. A final message from Helen followed. Once filed, he'll receive formal notice. But if you'd rather tell him yourself, you have until Tuesday. I closed the laptop. I would let him have 2 more days of his illusion. Let him sip wine on the patio of some overpriced resort, thinking he'd built a perfect life. Let him think his mother stayed in the background. I would wait, and then I would knock on the front door of the life he'd excluded me from, not as a guest, but as the owner, because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And hey, I slipped the keys into my purse like they weighed nothing at all. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it, just not the way he thought. Jessica went back to her meticulously arranged snack containers. Thomas adjusted the strap on the diaper bag. I stood at the kitchen island and watched them pack the life they'd built. Efficient, detached, polished. They left the next morning before the sun was fully up. Jessica double-checked the car seat, then triple-checked the fridge, then kissed the baby 3 times while Thomas carried suitcases to the trunk. I stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, holding my travel mug. "Text me if anything comes up," Thomas said. "Of course," I replied. "And don't worry about the alarm. I'll manage." Jessica offered a tight smile. "Thanks again for staying. It's a relief, really." I smiled back. "Enjoy the spa. You all deserve a break." Thomas leaned in and kissed my cheek. A formality. Then they were gone, taillights fading into the soft morning mist over the lake. I didn't wave. I went back inside and locked the door behind me. I walked through the house room by room, not inspecting, not claiming, just observing. It was a beautiful space designed for other people's approval. In the guest bathroom, I found a drawer filled with small, unopened designer toiletries, the kind you find in boutique hotels. I imagined Jessica refilling it every few weeks, hoping no one ever opened it, but also hoping someone might and be impressed. In the upstairs hallway, I noticed a faint scuff on the wall, likely from a stroller wheel. Jessica would notice it next week and schedule a painter. The idea of her fussing over it made me smile. Downstairs, I opened the garage and retrieved the box labeled "Mom Old Stuff." I carried it into the kitchen and set it on the table. I opened it. Framed photos, a birthday card, a recipe card, things they didn't throw out because that would have looked cruel, but couldn't bear to see either. I lined them up on the table one by one. The photo of Thomas at 15, awkward and lanky, with his arm around me. The one of us at the coast a year after my husband died, wind in our faces. The recipe card for my homemade apple pie, in my careful handwriting. I set them out like evidence in a quiet courtroom. Then I left them there and went into the study. I opened the laptop, logged in with the password Thomas once showed me, Jessica1985. I opened a browser tab and went to the county's property portal, typed in the address, and saw the trust details still listed. Eleanor Cross, primary owner. Thomas Cross, secondary. Still true. Still legal. Still mine. I left the page open, the evidence clear. Then I sat back in his office chair and rested my hands in my lap. I had the house. I had the keys. And now I had time. They were gone. Not in the sense that they had disappeared. They would return eventually, as scheduled. But in that moment, they were fully gone. The echo of the garage door sliding shut felt like the final line in a chapter I hadn't written, but now claimed. I stood barefoot on the cool marble tiles, the key ring still warm in my palm. Outside, the morning light poured through the wide windows, filling the house with a kind of hollow brightness. No voices, no monitors blinking, no baby toys scattered across the floor. I had never heard this house quiet before, and now that I had, I realized how loud it had been. Not in sound, but in the noise of pretending, of performance, of being tolerated. I went to the pantry and took out a proper mug. Not one of their dainty espresso cups, but a big, chipped ceramic mug I'd noticed shoved in the back, clearly forgotten. I filled it with hot water and added a bag of strong black tea from my suitcase. Jessica had all kinds of infused herbs and loose-leaf blends, but none of them tasted like anything. Just vapor. Just fashion. I took the mug outside to the back patio. The chairs were white and too stiff, but the view of the lake was pleasant. A stretch of green lawn ending in a stone seawall. I sat, and for the first time in days, let my shoulders drop. For a while, I just listened. A distant boat motor, the wind moving in a neighbor's chimes, the soft tick of the cooling patio stones. I thought about Thomas speeding down the freeway, music low, baby gurgling in the back seat. Jessica would be checking the itinerary. He'd nod, agree, do what he was told. That had always been Thomas's skill, adapting, blending into whatever shape his life required. It served him well as a financial consultant, and it served him well in erasing me, but not completely. He hadn't thought to check the fine print of the trust. That was always his mistake. Thinking love was the same thing as surrender. It never was. Love gives, but it remembers. That evening, I cooked. Not a performance meal, not a quinoa salad or catered hors d'oeuvres, but real food. I found flour, butter, eggs, made pasta from scratch, roasted a chicken with rosemary and lemon, and made a salad with too much vinegar, the way I like it. I set the table for one, used the good dishes, the ones Jessica said were only for company. I suppose I counted, for once. After dinner, I walked through the house again. In the baby's nursery, I sat in the rocking chair for a moment. It was brand new, silent, the kind that made no noise. When Thomas was born, I had a wooden rocker that groaned every time I moved. He used to fall asleep to that rhythm. Groan, creak, rock, creak. I could hear it still. I looked at the books on the shelf, all new, none with folded corners. None with smudges from little hands, just for display. In the guest room, my room, for now I took out my suitcase and packed only the things I would need for 2 more days. The rest I placed in the closet neatly. There was no hurry. The title transfer had been initiated. My lawyer would notify Thomas in due time. Until then, I wasn't moving. I wasn't hiding. I was simply home. I ended the night on the couch with a blanket and a crossword puzzle. I found myself whispering as I wrote, 4 letters to own, answer, hold. The pen felt good in my hand. The lights dimmed softly on their own, a timer probably, but I stayed there a little longer, not asleep, just still. It was quiet. It was enough. Jabcammed. The next morning, I dressed with purpose. Not in anything fancy, just slacks, a pressed shirt, and the shoes I wear for parent-teacher conferences back home. Polished, reliable shoes for walking into rooms where decisions get made. I ate breakfast slowly. Toast, butter, 1 soft-boiled egg. I sat at the kitchen island and watched the light shift across the counter. The marble gleamed under the morning Sunday, expensive, cold, and already mine. At 10 a.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened it to a woman in a dark blazer, tidy hair, and soft eyes behind wire-frame glasses. "Eleanor Cross?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Layla Ross. I'm here on behalf of Stafford and Patel." She stepped inside with quiet confidence, carrying a slim leather folder and a tablet. We sat at the dining table. I'd cleared it of Jessica's decorative objects. Layla opened the folder. "This is a standard title transfer packet. We've pre-filled based on the trust agreement Miss Stafford provided. You're listed as the primary owner and funding party. All we need now is your signature to initiate the filing." I nodded. She slid the tablet toward me. "Electronic is fastest," I signed. Each page blinked softly as my name appeared. When I finished, she tapped a few buttons. "Done," she said. "As of today, the legal title transfer is in progress. You'll receive confirmation by Friday. A physical copy will be mailed to your address of choice. I'll give you that before you go," I said. "I'm not staying here." She nodded. "Of course." She paused, then added, "For what it's worth, you're not the first mother I've met in this situation." I raised an eyebrow. "We handle a surprising number of quiet reversals," she said. "Mothers, aunts, grandparents, people who give everything and are later asked to disappear." I didn't respond, didn't need to. Before she left, she handed me a small envelope. "This is a summary packet. If you choose to speak directly with Mr. Cross, you'll have the updated ownership statement." I walked her to the door. Back inside, I sat at the table for a long time, the envelope still in my hand. Then, like instinct, I rose and walked to the study, opened Thomas's desk drawer, took out a pen, and wrote a note. "Thomas, you asked me not to tell the neighbors I was your mother, so I didn't. You asked me to be your former nanny, so I was. You didn't ask me to sign away my ownership, so I didn't. You asked me to help you build a life, so I did. I won't take more than what's already mine. I won't ask for thanks, but I won't disappear. Love, Mom." I folded the note and placed it on his desk, under his framed degree. Then I placed the summary packet on top, angled neatly. The house didn't feel different, not louder, not warmer, but I did. That afternoon, I opened the doors, front and back, and let the air move through. The neighbors wouldn't notice anything had changed, but everything had. Tomorrow, I'd pack my things, not to flee, just to move forward. But tonight, I would sleep in the master bedroom. I had the keys. I had the name. I had earned it. The filing was processed at 9:43 a.m. on a Wednesday. I received a notification in my inbox, a scanned copy of the transferred title deed. My name, listed singularly, under legal owner. No fanfare, no calls, just one sentence from Helen in the body of the email. "It's done." I sat at the kitchen table, letting the words settle, not in triumph, not in anger, just in balance. I took the physical copy of the document that Layla had left, slipped it into my suitcase, and then I cleaned. Not the way Jessica did, but cleaning with purpose. I washed the guest sheets, wiped down the kitchen counters, folded the laundry they'd left in the dryer. I did it not because they would return, but because I was leaving. I didn't need to live in this house to prove it was mine. I just needed to know it. At noon, I sat in the study. I reread the note I'd left Thomas. There was nothing else to say. At 2, I called a car service for the next morning, early, before they would return. That evening, I made one last meal, a simple beef stew, the way Thomas liked it when he was a child. I ate it at the table alone. Afterward, I packed my bag and left the note. Then I took the photo of us from the mom old stuff box in the garage, the one from the camping trip, and placed it gently on the hallway console table where everyone would see it. At midnight, I stood at the front door with the lights off, looking through the glass at the quiet street. The little plaque still read, "The Ashworths." I didn't need to change it. Let the neighbors keep their illusions. Let Thomas keep his. But when he opened that folder the next morning, when he saw my name alone, undeniable, he would understand. This wasn't revenge. It was just the return of what had always been mine. And it no longer needed his permission. They returned on a Sunday. Jessica stepped through the door first, her voice already elevated from the baby's whimpering in the car. "Can you get the diaper bag and the cooler?" Thomas followed, keys still in hand. He called out, "Mom, we're back." No answer. Jessica frowned. Maybe she's still asleep. Thomas checked the guest room. Empty. Bed made. Pillows arranged just so. And guest towels were folded on the bench at the foot of the bed. He opened the closet. Empty hangers. In the kitchen, Jessica placed the cooler on the counter. "She didn't text or leave a note?" "Nothing," Thomas muttered, pulling out his phone. He turned toward the hallway and noticed the change first. A framed photo on the console table, him and his mother on a camping trip, the wind lifting his hair, her hand resting gently on his back. He froze. "Jessica," he said, "come here." She appeared behind him. He pointed to the photo. That wasn't there before. He didn't wait for her to answer. He walked to his office, his heart thudding. The note was sitting on his desk, folded neatly. He read it in silence. Jessica stood in the doorway. "What is it?" Thomas didn't look up. He picked up the second sheet, the summary packet. The title transferred. His name was gone. Only hers remained. Jessica stepped forward and saw the heading. "Wait, what the hell is this? This can't be legal." "It is," Thomas said heavily, sitting down in his chair. The house around him felt suddenly altered. She was always the primary owner in the trust. "You said that was temporary." "I said that," he snapped. "She never did." "Well, you better fix this," Jessica said, her voice cold with fury, before she turned and stormed up the stairs. Thomas sat in the office for a long time, the note in his hand. He tried to be angry, tried to feel betrayed, but instead, he just felt the memory of his mother's hand on his back. She hadn't shouted, hadn't stormed. She had simply reminded him of the truth. A week later, I sat in my lawyer's office. "Are you certain, Eleanor?" Helen asked. "This is a final step." "I am," I said. "List the property for sale. The full proceeds are to be placed in a trust for my granddaughter Emily. Full transfer on her 25th birthday." 3 days after that, Thomas called. I let it ring once before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was quiet. "I received the official notice. From your lawyer." "Yes," I said. There was a long silence. "You're selling the house?" "I am." He didn't argue. I could hear the sounds of his life in the background, a baby's soft gurgle, a microwave beeping. "You left the photo out," he said, his voice softer now. "Yes, thank you for not embarrassing me," he managed to say. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Oh, Thomas, I didn't do this to embarrass you. I did it to remind you." "What happens now?" he asked, the question heavy with everything he couldn't say. "The house is sold," I said simply. "The money is secured for Emily's future. It's more than fair." He was quiet for a long time. "Yes," he finally said. "It is." Later that week I received a package. No note, just the small photo frame from the hallway console, us on the camping trip. I placed it on my shelf. Daniel didn't visit, but he called on birthdays and holidays. He never mentioned the house again. Neither did I. The plaque that read, "The Ashworths," disappeared from the lawn one day, because it was never about the house. It was about memory, about dignity, about putting my name back where it belonged. It was about making sure the next generation knew where things came from, so that one day, when Emily was grown, she would know the truth, not just about her inheritance, but about the woman who made sure it was there for her. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes love has teeth, and sometimes the house remembers who built it.